Jesus shows them evidence of the wounds. The disciples rejoiced after seeing the evidence. Mary's testimony is vindicated. All of this happens without the disciple Thomas being present. When the others tell Thomas this great news, "We have seen the Lord," the same words used by Mary Magdalene, Thomas is rightly skeptical and isn't taking their word for it. "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, I will not believe." Well, the others had had this benefit. Why not Thomas? We often call Thomas a doubter, but the truth is that we all need a little Thomas in our community, someone willing to push back on what sometimes seems like craziness. Thomas isn't a doubter or a malignant truther as much as a legitimate truth seeker. Thomas just wants the truth, which is something we all want. Thomas does not reject the idea of resurrection, but simply needs more evidence, the same evidence the other disciples had already received. And then the opportunity comes. The pattern repeats: a locked door, an appearance by the risen Christ. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it in my side." Jesus never refers to Thomas as a doubter. First, keep in mind that the other disciples had the benefit of this evidence. And second, Thomas's doubts are not about the resurrection of Jesus, but about the reports of the resurrection. When Thomas saw Jesus, he had no doubt. And finally, what Jesus says to Thomas in verse 29 applies to all the disciples. "Have you believed because you have seen me? Those who have not seen and yet come to believe." All of the disciples believed that Jesus was alive only because they saw Jesus in the flesh. Like Thomas, they did not believe the reports of Jesus' resurrection either. So how are these disciples any different from Thomas? Thomas didn't believe the report of the disciples did not believe the report of the women. They were all doubters, every one of them. And their doubt was only suspended. Thomas responds and says, "I've seen, and yet have come to believe." John is speaking to his audience and to generations like us. John is giving us the evidence and asking us to believe it on the basis of the evidence itself. John wants us to believe because the Spirit given to us continues to act as a witness to the resurrection and ongoing presence of Christ in our lives and in this world. It's not that the evidence is unimportant and that this is just a leap of faith. It's actually the opposite. The evidence for the resurrection of Christ is quite compelling. For example, if you were going to make up a story to impress others in the first century, you would not have a woman as your primary witness. They had no voice, no credibility. also not proclaim that a body had been raised from the dead in a Greco-Roman world that devalued the human body. And finally, any Jewish person present would have said that anyone who was crucified on a tree was cursed, and that resurrection was not possible. But here is this large and growing body of people who claim the impossible has become possible. They have witnessed it, experienced it, and despite every effort to quiet them, they refuse to shut up about it. Persecutions by emperors, Nero, Domitian, Marcus Aurelius, and others had no effect. Charles Colson, or President Richard Nixon, was indicted in the Watergate scandal, which was an actual